So you're probably wondering why Trump is asking for all these recounts and filing all these lawsuits. Well, the problem is Don Jr. and Eric screwed up the original count. So you know what happened, it was late night, it looked like Trump was in the lead, he was gonna win, and then all these extra ballots came in, and so they, all these county clerks asked for extra help. So both sides, smelling a con from the other, sent their people. Now Biden, he did the smart thing. He sent people who wouldn't be intimidated, who would be loyal to him, and knew how to count. So he sent some African Americans and some Mexicans, and he sent drug dealers, because drug dealers are not going to be intimidated by anybody. They certainly know how to count, and they had already pledged their loyalty to Biden. So Biden was all set. Trump was I think he was giving a speech, or he was on the phone with other world leaders. They were congratulating him on winning. Of course, I was in bed, so I wasn't there because I thought he won myself. And so it was left to Don Jr. and Eric who to send. That they heard that the Biden campaign was sending African Americans and Mexicans, so they decided to send white supremacists. And they thought, well, they won't be intimidated by a bunch of black folks and a bunch of Mexicans. But here's the problem, which I had to explain to them later. White supremacists are very stupid. They can't count. And Don Jr. and Eric were surprised, and the rest of the room surprised. And I'm like, yeah, white supremacists, they can't count. That's why they're joining white supremacy. They can't be in any other group. Who wants somebody who can't count? And they started looking at me with a bit of side eye, like, you sure? And I'm like, name a smart white supremacist. Whole room got quiet. So I'm like, see, none of you can name anything. Name anyone or anything. Name anything a white supremacist done that's smart. Yeah. And then you send them to count. And they're like, then they're starting to realize they made a mistake now. And so I guess what happened is, the poll worker would count, they were going through. And then, the drug dealers were counting, they were going through. And then the whites went to the white supremacists to verify the count, and they're just sitting there looking at it, knowing they can't count, so they just said, okay, it's good. And that's how Biden came back to win. And of course, when I found out, I told Trump, and Trump was like, who let them decide? I was like, I don't know. They were like, well, why didn't you step in? And I said, well, I was in bed. And then I thought you'd won. And then Trump's like, well, why didn't anyone call me? Well, Don and Jr. and everything. They know everything, so they thought they could handle it. So Trump's like, well, what do we do now? We need to find a judge. So, of course, I go back into the room. They're all like now all sad because they realize they may have screwed up the election. I'm like, well, we're going to have to get some recounts and find someone who can count, who supports Trump. And you're going to need to find a judge. And then I left. They're like, well, aren't you going to help us? I'm like, no, this is your mess. Y'all got to clean it up. So I get about 10 steps away, and I'm like, wait a minute. And I go back and I go back into the room, and I look in, and people are working, they're writing names down. And I go, you do know you have to find a real judge. They're like, yeah. They're like, yes, we know it's a real judge. And I go, so then I come back with, you can't use Aaron Judge. He's a baseball player for the New York Yankees. Just because his name is Judge doesn't mean he's a real judge. And then they all started taking their writing pads and started crossing out names. And I'm like, oh boy, we're going to lose this. So I just left. And I called Trump back and I said, well, they're looking, but I think you're in trouble, man. So you better have a plan B because they screwed this up. Because I think you may lose the recount. I don't know what to tell you. He was beside himself. And that's why he went on and made that angry speech. He was frustrated. And so now when you turn on the news and you see Trump talking about a recount, now you know why.